Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Kamil, and thank you for joining me for another episode of On the Air. And today I'm really excited and honored to have Steve Bristow with me. And he is one of the top animators that I have come across. And just to give you a little bit of background before we started the whole BURAAQ animated series, Steve has always been there for us, very generous with his advice and kind of guiding us as to what are the pitfalls we should look for and what are the best practices and guidance so that we proceed accordingly. And he's been very helpful, and he's gracious enough to join us today from Melbourne, all the way back there where he's wearing a jacket. So, you know, it's cold there, even though it's summer here in the US, but he's all geared up for winter. And thank you, Steve, for joining us from Melbourne.
Thank you, Camille, for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be part of your show.
Tell you a little bit more about Steve. He has more than 20 years of experience in animations, CGI, producing shows, TV shows, and especially his experience in working on a show called Saladin in Malaysia. And we'll also talk about that later on. So before we start, Steve, tell us, how did it all begin for you? What the interest in animation? How did you get into the animation business?
Yeah, all right, that's a good question. Well, I studied. I was interested in film and television, and I studied in media production at a uni in Melbourne in the 80s, and I did a few units of animation, which I really enjoyed. But when I graduated, I wasn't like thinking, okay, I want to be an animator. Because, back then in Melbourne, there was hardly any opportunity to work in animation anyway. The industry was almost non-existent. 3D animation sort of had only just been invented. So anyway, I was lucky enough to get one of the jobs I applied for was as a 3D animator in a studio in Melbourne. And it was brand new facility. They bought some technology from America. There was an American guy to train us because, in those days there were no animation courses. So I was lucky to sort of get in really at the ground level when 3D animation was first starting in this little studio in Melbourne. Wow.
And then lots have changed since then, right? When it comes to the whole animation industry, and you see the advances in CGI and different types of animation. What do you feel is the most drastic change that you've seen that's completely changed since Pixar came in the picture, and now you see all these animated movies? How do you feel about where it's going now?
Wow. Yeah, everything has changed. I mean, the way we were doing computer animation back then was really different to now. You could almost, not do anything. Well, you couldn't do character animation, really. We were just mainly, doing TV station idents and opening title sequences and TV commercials. So yeah, when the whole Pixar thing started, and that's when people, started to realize that, hey, you can animate characters using computers. And so then, then all of that happened. The software and the technology became a lot more sophisticated, and a lot more people came on board, courses, and universities started to open up courses and train.
So it's also very lucrative now as a career. If you think about people who are thinking about getting into animation from a career perspective, you think it's up there from a, if you want to build a profession out of it, is it still a very lucrative career path, you think?
Look, it can be. I mean, generally in the arts, salaries are not all that high unless you really excel at your work. If you become really good at your craft, then you become sought after. Then it can be lucrative.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's definitely a profession now. I mean, people study for it and become an animator. There's all kinds of animated content, like from social media content, explainer video content, TV series, feature film.
Yeah, and getting into TV series, I mean, I know in the 90s you worked on Saladin, the animated series. If people who haven't seen it, it's a very popular animated series that came, in the 2000s, and we were really excited. We saw it, and it's like, finally, there's an animated show that talks about the historical aspects of Muslim characters. And Steve was actually the one who actually directed one of the seasons, correct? Am I correct?
Yeah, I directed, there were 26 episodes made.
Right.
I directed most of the pre-production and several episodes. And then after about, I think, 2.5 years on the project, I left it, and then another director took over for me and kind of finished it off. So, but yeah.
So did you actually move to Kuala Lumpur for that series, or were you still in Melbourne working remotely?
No, I'd been working in Malaysia for several years.
Oh, wow.
I moved over there for my career. I was offered a job by a broadcaster, and then eventually set up my own studio doing animated TV commercials. And then we started to get into animated TV series. We made a few local series for local broadcasters in 2D using Flash.
Yeah.
And so when this idea for Saladin first came up,
right,
it was the Malaysian government who where the idea came from, and they wanted to make a world-class sort of TV series to kind of develop their animation skills in that country, and also to make something for the Arab world,
right,
not the Muslim world. So, and at the time, I was probably, one of the most experienced directors in the country. So they approached me about it, and eventually, I started working on the show.
Yeah.
And
so were you part of the whole script writing as well, from the post production of character development and things like that? I mean, did you take any historical guides from what the character looked like, and how was that process of building that Saladin character?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, there's a real lot of research done before I started. I mean, I think when I come on board, there were a few scripts written and a few characters had been designed, and that had been running for about a year. And then later, Al Jazeera came on board as a co-production partner, and they had a historian. I think he was based in Egypt, and he kind of looked at everything we did to make sure it was culturally authentic, or not crossing any cultural boundaries or anything. But yeah, a lot of research went into it, right down to the shape of Saladin's nose, whether it was Kurdish enough or not.
Yeah. Oh wow. I can imagine. And it was sometimes I wonder is why especially you working there for a long time and working on this series, and since then we're not seeing a lot of content unless there's a government initiative or things like that, especially around Muslim content in animation. We don't see a lot of Muslim countries producing these content. I mean, from your perspective, what do you think that is? Is it just because of lack of skill sets or funding or money or just a vision? What do you think is lacking there?
Yeah, gee, that's a tricky question to answer.
Yeah.
I guess I guess in the Arab world, probably Egypt, I believe, is kind of the epicenter of Arab popular culture in terms of film and television.
Right.
So I don't know what gets made there really these days, but if whatever does get made certainly doesn't spread, it doesn't travel worldwide. Maybe there's stuff made locally that we don't know about.
Right.
But I think I've probably world access to global film and television markets, it's kind of dominated by the Western world, really.
Right.
And because stuff made in the West tends to travel globally, but stuff made in Asian countries or African countries or Middle Eastern countries doesn't seem to travel well, and so therefore probably not saleable. And if it's not saleable, then that means there's probably not a lot of money to make stuff.
So do you think with YouTube and Netflix and all this stuff, do you think that changed the game, especially for content producers, especially small producers like us, where it's opening the doors for this, like you said, the global distribution? Before it was kind of hold tightly with the top 3 media producers, and you have to go through all these channels. Now it's wide open. YouTubers are everywhere. Do you think that changed the dynamics for people who are in animation and building content?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that changed everything. And your BURAAQ show. I
Right.
mean, you couldn't have done that before YouTube.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're right, it was dominated by the Disneys and the Cartoon
Mm.
Networks, and but now the level, the playing field is pretty leveled out a lot, and with a little bit of funding and a few buddies, you can put up a webisode, a series of webisodes, and then that gets traction and gets noticed, and that can then build into
Yeah.
a bigger audience, and maybe then a deal with a network, or a streaming
Right.
service.
And then if when you touched upon the episodes and things, are you seeing, and you also are working on so much content, have you seen that the attention span of folks are they still willing to watch a 22-minute episode, or they're more into kind of a TikTok world or Instagram at 60 minutes, they're gone, 60 seconds, they just want their dosage of entertainment? Has that been the experience that you've seen, that now as a creative animation director that you are being kind of pulled towards creating shorter and content for that audience?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Definitely, attention spans have gotten a lot shorter, especially when
Yeah.
it comes to social media and mobile devices. But I've been mostly working in that kind of really short formats, in the last few years. But I think that there still seems to be an appetite for longer stuff. I mean, a lot of television animated series are still made in traditional longer formats, 22 minutes, and things like that. So I think if the content is really good,
People watch it.
stories
Yeah.
are great, then I think people are still prepared to sit down and devote some time
And
to
watch it. Yeah.
it.
And then obviously the quality is getting better and better and better with things like that. Uh, and there's a lot of people who come to us and ask us as well as, hey, I love doing animation. I want to create my own character. I want to come up with, I mean, how hard is it to get into this business as far as if somebody's thinking about setting up their own animation studio?
Yeah, well, I guess it's never easy,
Yeah.
starting something up. There are still costs. I mean, starting a small studio, for example,
Mhm.
there is cost involved. You need to, sort of earn money while you're doing it, and you need to then find clients who want to use your service.
Yeah.
But it can be done. The barriers to entry are much lower these days. That's for sure. The cost of computers and software is a lot less, and you can collaborate over networks. You don't even need a physical studio anymore.
Right. Yeah. So do you see a lot of that, especially during the COVID time, especially in your field with you being in Creativa in Melbourne?
Yeah.
How's that functioning now with everybody remote from running an animated studio? Is it as smooth as if you were in person, or has it changed from a production perspective?
It's almost as smooth. We pretty much didn't skip a beat, really. We just sort of all went remote, and so I deal with animators working remotely every day. We collaborate over Google Meet. We use an online app called Whipster to review work and give feedback. So it's quite surprisingly, we all adapted pretty well.
Yeah, especially with, like you mentioned, technology has leveled the playing field with open software like Blender, and then you have all this cloud computing for rendering before you have to stack all these machines in your garage or somewhere just to render like a 2-minute video or something like that. That has definitely changed the game. And to touch to that point is, even though that's leveled the playing field, but you still need that spark. You still need that creative edge to kind of stand out, because a lot of people are doing animation. Some are doing good, okay, and excellent animation. So the competitive aspect has risen as well in this field. And are you seeing more and more people now getting into animation in Australia?
In Australia, there's not a great deal of people who are setting up their own studios or doing their own series. but there are, those ones who are really entrepreneurial or really have a burning passion to do this idea they've got and get it out there. Those people usually get something up online. A lot of animators are happy to just work for a studio and then, but those people who really want to tell stories and got a vision of some show they want to put up, then if they persevere, they usually eventually get there. As you discovered.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and then tell us a little bit about. I mean, besides Saladin that you worked in Malaysia, you also worked in another series that is more Islamic or based on the Islamic culture.
I did, yeah. After Saladin, I was offered the position of a director on another show called Sherazade, the Untold Stories, and which was based on the 1001 Nights stories. So it was all set, it was with the characters like Sinbad and Ali Baba and all those characters, and Sherazade with the main characters. And so all the stories were derived or kind of inspired from the 1001 Nights. They weren't exactly the same stories. They were kind of, adapted a fair bit. So yeah, I guess my work on Saladin, which was very similar in scope and in the world it was set in and the complexity of the world was kind of similar, and so it seemed to be a good fit. And so with that Saladin experience, I think why they hired me for Sherazade.
It has given you quite a bit of perspective of the Muslim and Islamic culture working on Saladin and also on Arabian Nights. And so what was your take on the characters from Saladin to maybe Ali Baba or Sherazade or Saladin? How much of that is kind of Hollywoodized, if you will, or away from reality and more fantasy?
Right. Well, in the case of Saladin, the stories were fiction. I mean, the dilemma was how do we make stories for kids about this hero Saladin, and make them fictional without kind of trivializing what he did and his achievements. So it was always this sort of walk this fine line between making fun, funny entertainment for kids. And also trying to stay authentic, culturally authentic and respectful,
Right.
So those characters. When you work on a show like that, you really feel like the characters, like they're real people when you work with them for a long time. And the characters develop over time as more scripts get written, more of their personality, goes into it.
Right.
But in terms of the cultural aspect, I learned a lot about Islamic culture and the Arab world and Saladin.
Yeah.
And found it fascinating. And we actually, during the pre-production, we were trying to get to go to Syria to have a look at some of the ancient sites.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
It never happened.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon either.
It's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, that would have been fantastic.
How many seasons were developed for Saladin? I forgot. It was like
26 episodes. It was kind of, we called it season 1 and 2, but it was actually, one season of 26 episodes.
Right. I think there's a lot of, like you said, Netflix, and Amazon and now Disney Plus, and then you have all these streaming coming in, and we also see quite a bit of expansion of local streaming services in like Middle East and Pakistan and India. They have their own kind of a streaming, and there's actually a couple of Muslim streaming services now. Like there's one called Ali Huda, there's one Alchemia, and they're both airing Saladin series.
Really?
They are. They're both on the platform. So I'll send you a link. You can check it. You can check it out.
Fantastic.
So and then that's why we were very fascinated in a way, because we haven't seen content like that being produced ever again. So you were the only one who did it, and after that, nobody else has done it. So that's why it's important to have you here to kind of share that experience with you, because we do want to have that same spark again. And it could be done, right? It's something that's a lot of rich history is there, a lot of great, brilliant characters and historical characters that we have that we can build stuff on, or even stuff like, BURAAQ or stuff like that. That's kind of strange.
Well,
Yeah.
no, you're right. It's such a rich, untapped world of culture and stories and locations. It was fascinating doing the research for Saladin, and it's a pity that there's not more of that stuff that's reaching wider audience, being made and reaching wider audiences.
Setting up a animation studio, how much you think it usually costs to set up an initial? I mean, do you usually need people like, you need an animator? Do you need a rigger? Do you need somebody who's doing this and that? What's the bare minimum that people can start with? What would you recommend people who are getting into this? Don't think too big. Some people think, oh, I got to hire this, I got to do this, or do you just need a laptop and Blender? Can you do it with that? I mean, what would be your recommendation?
It depends how much animation you want to make. I mean, in the case of Saladin, there was a lot of people involved in that. I mean, that had a big budget. I think that had about, probably 10 to 15 million US dollars. Of budget.
At that time,
That time, but if you want to, I guess like an entry-level studio to make like web.
Like maybe 6 minutes, 8 minutes animation, and they want to release it like every week or every month. Like, what would be the best practice for that?
Right. Let's see. Probably, probably less. It's a hard one to say. Less than 20 people. Maybe. Even maybe a 10 people, obviously the less people you got, the longer it's going to take to create an episode. But maybe 10 people, a couple of animators, a couple of modelers, a lighter, a rigger, somebody who does visual effects, and that'd be a sort of a small team. Yeah. And then of course, you need a storyboard artist and a writer, of course, as well. But maybe like 10 or 15 people, you could have a little studio.
Decent, And how many of them would you say, instead of you can get freelancers? You think getting people like freelancers to get started is a good idea, or is it somebody dedicated? It's more better than getting people outsourced to do some of the work.
Right. Look, if you're making a show and you want sort of reliability of that there's going to be people there every day, then it's probably better to have a studio. And freelancers sometimes, there's there may be issues. Maybe they're busy on something else as well, and they're not fully dedicated to you. They may say, "Oh, I can't work. I'm not available next month," or so they can not. I guess they're not as reliable as a dedicated team.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, we've personally experienced that as well, with a lot of delays, costs, because we hired a few people, outsourced them, and exact thing happened. Like, oh, they're gone for a couple of weeks, and no feedback, no communication, and our timelines are all messed up. And so it's been a pretty challenging road getting into, especially relying on freelancers. It's always good to have in-house and people that you have, you can just talk to them every day. This is something that they're doing, they're focused and getting stuff done. So I definitely agree that having your own is better than freelancing.
Yeah, it's definitely better. I mean, but having said that, I work with a lot of freelancers, and but they're people who I know and trust, and we've already got this working relationship. So
that's also important. So what's next for you, Steve? What are you working on these days, and where are you, and what's your future look like?
All right. Well, I'm working in at a studio in Melbourne called Creativa. It's an animation studio. We also do other technologies as well, like AR and VR and video production. But it's mostly, I guess, an animation studio, and we're busy doing a lot of shorter form projects, TV commercials, explainer videos, training videos. I'm also, so that's kind of my day job, and it keeps me very busy. I'm also working, I'm sort of in development with a Malaysian partner on an animated preschool series. But that's kind of early days, and we're just
Yeah.
sort of in the kind of pre-production and planning stage at the moment.
So what made you move to Melbourne from Malaysia?
Well, I'm from Melbourne originally,
Yeah.
and started my career in Melbourne, and then I went to Malaysia to work on a contract for a broadcaster. And then one thing led to another. I started my own studio. I stayed there for 20 years. And then I just thought, I was curious about what it might be like to come back. My wife was curious. My kids were growing up, and I thought, if they experience life in Australia as well. So yeah, we came back about 10 years ago. I came back to Melbourne.
Wow, that's great. And then also touching upon, like you said, like you're working on VR and AR, and we're looking at the futuristic stuff that people are now moving towards. And one thing that popped in my head was this technology about deep fake, right? How people are now using CGI to completely, there's a very famous TikToker who looks like Tom Cruise. It is like amazing, but it's so realistic. I mean, what do you see something changing in the future where we won't need, like as extreme as we won't need actors anymore? Like we can just, bring back the dead actors alive, like Elvis is back again, just get somebody who can impersonate like Elvis, but have a deep fake and you can't even tell the difference.
Well, it looks like we've arrived, really. You look at that deep fake stuff and it's amazing. I mean, for years there's this uncanny valley problem where you make stuff that's like almost real and it's creepy, but with the deep fake stuff, it looks like, well, we have the technology now to, recreate, believable humans.
Yeah. I mean, we have the de-aging aspect already happening with, movies with like making young Robert De Niro, young Al Pacino, just do a little CGI and you're done. So it just makes me think where the future is, especially when it gets a little scary because we live in an age of misinformation, right? So it could be some post on Facebook or something and people are like, oh yeah, he told me it was, Biden saying that or Obama saying that and causing a lot of havoc. So, I mean, that's kind of scary if you think about it.
Absolutely, it could definitely cause problems, if the fakes got into the wrong hands,
How is the selling of the content aspect change? I mean, is it the same, like somebody, the technology has leveled the playing field and people can build content, if it's smaller, medium, or long content. Does the selling of the content, has that changed as well? Or that's the same, the way you want to sell your content to major studios, has that changed a lot too, or that's the same?
Yeah, no, I think that's changed a lot as well. I mean, there used to be, there's more ways to sell your content now, There used to be, you would have to do a co-production, find a broadcaster partner, find a, distributor partner, and sort of, there was sort of a fairly specific way to do these things. But now that with all these streaming services around, you can go straight to a streaming service if you've got a great idea, and they will help you fund it. I mean,
is there any conferences that are happening? Like there used to be a MIP conference and other major, are they still a great place to exchange ideas and meet potential?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, no, all those big players are still around, still making a lot of broadcast stuff. I guess, the streaming services are now part of that mix, and I'm sure they're all represented at, MIP and MIPCOM and Kidscreen. I mean, there's, of course, the physical conferences haven't been happening because of COVID. But, the way the business is done is changing all the time. But, all the big players, I think they're just adapting to it. So you have to, I guess you have to keep on top of that. If you're in that business of, attending all those conferences, you really got to be on top of, okay, what's the latest way to do business? How do I do business with the streaming services now?
Steve, how can people, if they're looking for your services or it's like, oh, I want Steve to be on my team, and how can they contact you or find you?
I've got a website. It's called stevebristow.com. So it's just like a portfolio website and a bit of my bio and profile. So you can contact me from there.
Great. I mean, I'll have that information also available on the description below, so you can definitely contact Steve. I mean, we stay in touch with Steve all the time, but I definitely encourage you to contact him if you want any guidance. He's been very, very generous. I mean, I send him one email and he responds back quickly. So if you have any questions or even looking for some guidance, you can definitely send him an email or contact him.
Sure.
But thanks again, Steve, for joining us from Melbourne. It's been
No problem.
it's been a pleasure, and we'll definitely stay in touch. And I think it's good evening, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Kamil. I'll
All
see you
right.
later.
See you later. Thanks.
Bye.